Hello hunters, and welcome back to Super Fan Natural. Witches. They're probably one of the first things that come to mind when you think about magic and spellcasting. Supernatural didn't really introduce witches and their craft until Season 3, but once they did, it became a big part of the show. Whenever a series gets witchy, there's a very important question that has to be answered. What makes someone a witch? I mean, it obviously usually has to do with magic powers, but can anyone learn to use them, or are they something you have to be born with? According to the most prominent witch in the series, Rowena McLeod, there are 3 types of witches in Supernatural. She gives a brief description of each type and how they differ, however her explanations leave a bit to be desired. Not only that, throughout the series we see a few witches that don't seem to fit into any of the groups Rowena mentioned. In this video, I'll list and describe the various types of witches we see in the show and give my interpretation on how their powers work. Before we talk about specific types of witches, we first need to get a feel for how witchcraft works in general. On the surface, it seems pretty simple. You just mix some ingredients, say some words in a language other than English, maybe draw a few symbols, and boom, magic. However, there's clearly something else going on here. While those steps are all it takes to pull off some tricks like summoning weak demons, bigger and better spells don't seem like they can be cast by any random scrub. The show occasionally mentions magical power or talent, which is necessary for spells above a certain level, and that the power of a witch doesn't rely solely on their knowledge of spells, but also the amount of talent or power they possess to make them work. We never really get a lot of insight into what that means, but I have a few theories. The way I see it, words, symbols, and regular items possess innate magical properties, and spells amount to a kind of magical reaction you get by mixing different ingredients with specific properties. However, just mixing the reagents isn't enough. In order to set off a reaction, you need a catalyst, a spark of magical energy to get things going, and this is what the witch provides. For the purposes of this video, I'll just call it power. Now, every single person seems to have at least a little bit of power within them. However, most randos aren't packing enough juice to really do anything except the most basic rituals. They can gather all the right ingredients and say every word properly, but if they don't have enough witchy power, then they just won't be able to make certain spells work. You may be tempted to believe that a witch is classified based on how much power they've got. However, I personally believe that the classification is actually based on how a particular witch is able to gain access to more power than the human baseline. The first class of witch is the natural. As you may have gathered from the name, naturals are the exception to what I've just said. While most people don't carry enough power to do much of anything, naturals are born with a little extra razzle-dazzle, enough to activate more complicated spells that normal folks couldn't pull off. We never get an explanation as to why this happens. It seems to just be something like a mutation that some people are born with. We know that it's not necessarily genetic, as Rowena, who was one of the most powerful witches ever, produced a son without any noticeable magical talent, at least in life. It is possible that there is a degree of heritability. I'm just saying it's no guarantee that a natural witch will produce another natural. Naturals are born with a certain degree of innate power, however, they are able to become more powerful with study and practice. By the end of her life, Rowena was not only the most powerful witch, she was also one of the strongest beings in the series, top 20 at least. In fact, she was so powerful that she had to be nerfed with a binding spell that limited the amount of power she had access to. And even then, she could still do things like extend her life for at least 300 years, hex people and even angels into a savage rage, shoot purple Sith lightning using just words. She could even cheat death using what amounts to extra lives. So yeah, she was a bit of a beast. But I need to stress that while she was a natural, she still had to work and study for centuries to reach that level of magic. It just came a little easier to her. There are several other witches that are implied to be naturals. However, I'm pretty sure the only ones confirmed were Max and Tasha Baines, neither of whom seemed nearly as powerful as Miss McLeod. One thing they did have in common was a purple glow in their eyes when using their magic sometimes. I don't think we ever saw this from any other witch, implying that it could be a trait unique to naturals, but that's never fully specified. Okay, so what if you want to be a witch, but you aren't lucky enough to be born with natural talent? Well, there are options, the first of which is to study, study, study. Most people aren't born with the power needed to be a real witch. However, it is possible to gain at least a little bit through hard work and training, and this makes someone a student witch. Exactly how you do that is a little vague. However, it seems like part of the process is to start with what you can do and gradually crank up the intensity, and eventually you'll be able to perform more elaborate and powerful spells. We see this kind of progression in Sam Winchester. At the beginning of the series, he can only do simple rituals like summoning a ghost, then he moves on to making hex bags, then by the end of the series, he can create rifts into hell and even revive the dead. This makes it seem like magical power is a kind of muscle, and the more you work it, the stronger it gets. We don't really know if students are able to reach the same level of magical power as Rowena. When first describing the class, she claimed that they could, quote, eke out a modicum of magical talent, which really makes it seem like they have a much lower ceiling than naturals. It's possible that she just hadn't met any particularly impressive students, but even if there are limits, they're still able to do some pretty cool stuff. Like I already mentioned, Sam could travel to and from hell for fun, and he was able to bring a ghost back to life. We also saw a couple of student witches shoot energy blasts at each other, which may or may not have been all that powerful, but it looked kind of cool. Some students are joined by a shape-shifting helper called a familiar, but we only saw that once, and it is a little weird, not gonna lie. Before I move on to the last class, I need to cover a group that, while not officially recognized by the Grand Coven, seemed to be something of a subset of student spellcaster. In Supernatural, human souls contain a shit ton of magical power, which can be used to do a lot of stuff. Most of the time, soul power is used by supernatural creatures like demons, who collect said souls as part of a deal. However, we do see several people who could harness the power of their own soul in order to perform magic. The first instance of this was Henry Winchester, who was able to use his soul to power a time travel spell via a technique he learned from the Men of Letters. After jumping to the future, he claimed that he would need several days for his soul to recharge, meaning that however this trick works, it doesn't seem to cause any permanent damage so long as it's not overused. However, the same can't be said about the other soul tapping technique, which was seen from Lily Sunder. Lily was a woman obsessed with angels, and after years of studying their lore, she discovered a way to use her soul to gain angel-like powers. Using this mysterious magic allowed her to extend her life, heal herself, enhance her strength, shoot blasts of light, hack into angel radio, and most importantly, she could neutralize angelic powers. Later, she would teach the Nephilim Jack Klein how to use this power in order to sustain his life after losing his grace, and after he started abusing the magic, he was able to do all sorts of crazy feats, like exorcising and incinerating a goddamn archangel. So this technique seems much more powerful than the one used by the Men of Letters. However, it comes with a steep downside. Each time you use this magic, it burns away a bit of your soul permanently, meaning that if you use it enough, you can lose your entire immortal essence. So that's a few ways for non-naturals to become witches. But what if you're not willing to study and read books like some kind of nerd? Well, there is one more option that lets you gain power quickly and with little effort. Remember how I mentioned people selling their souls to demons? Well, one of the things you can ask for in return is the power to make spells work. People who become witches this way are known as borrowers, because the power they wield doesn't really come from them, but rather it's on loan from a demon. As such, they only wield as much power as their broker grants them, meaning that they're almost certainly going to be weaker than their buyer, and if they want more juice, they'll have to look to other sources. Also, if you sell your soul to a demon, well, more often than not, you're going to hell after you die. So, borrowers may not have to put as much effort into training, but that low learning curve comes with a steep cost. The way these witches' magic manifests can vary case to case. Most of the time, borrowers seem to rely on hex bags and rituals. However, we do occasionally see some use instamagic with words alone. In one kind of weird case, a borrower's power was channeled through a magic ring, and she believed that if she could convince another powerful witch to willingly accept said ring, they would take her place in the deal, meaning their soul would be marked instead of hers. She gets capped before she can give it away. However, afterwards, a natural witch takes the ring and is able to use her powers. So, not sure what to make of that, but I really hope she still went to hell, because that lady was nuts and rude. Speaking of hell, like all damned souls, borrowers who end up there have the chance to be converted into a demon, at which point they can actually power their spells themselves, as we saw from Ruby. The last thing I'll say about borrowers is that while we only see them deal with demons, there are hints that it may be possible to get power from other entities. We see several people deal with or even bind fairies, and we know that angels can make soul deals, so maybe if you find the right buyer, you can get a little sizzle from them. That's all three of the recognized classifications of witch: natural, student, and borrower. There are a bunch of witches in the show that aren't classified on screen, but most of them use magic in a way that we've seen from someone who was classified. However, there are a few individuals who are either referred to as a witch or are witch adjacent, who really stand out as unique and don't seem to fit any regular class. The first is the Striga. This thing was referred to as a kind of Albanian witch, but it doesn't seem to cast spells or make hex bags. Instead, it seems almost vampiric as it feeds off a kind of spiritual essence called Spiritus Vitae. Whatever this is, the Striga sucks it out of regular people, which causes them to get sick and die. That isn't its only trick. It's also immortal and nearly invulnerable, and while it usually looks like Emperor Palpatine, it can change its appearance to blend in with regular society using some kind of transformation or illusion. It's very possible, likely even, that this thing isn't a witch, but rather some kind of monster, but I felt like it needed to be mentioned since it was the very first creature to be identified as some kind of witch way back in Season 1. Next up, we've got the Wicked Witch, as in the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. In Supernatural, Oz is a real place that exists in another dimension, and while we don't see all that much of it, we do meet a few of its residents, including the aforementioned witch, who is wicked. Elphaba showed off some pretty unique magic, including green lightning, a kind of mind control that's similar to possession, and she could transform into a cloud of green smoke similar to demons. We have absolutely no information about this lady. We don't know about her origins, we don't know if she was born with her powers or if she gained them later in life. It kind of seems like she wasn't even human, so she technically shouldn't qualify for this list. But I mean, come on, I can't leave a character called the Wicked Witch of the West off of a witch list. Kidnapped by... Let's talk about shamanism. In the show, shamanism is supposedly distinct from witchcraft. However, exactly how is a bit vague. They both rely on spellcasting to make things happen, and while we do see unique effects from shamanism, it's nothing I wouldn't believe you could do with witchcraft. If I had to come up with a difference, I would say that shamanism is primarily used to give one thing the properties of another. For example, the first shaman in the show ate body parts from animals in order to give himself their abilities, like dog senses or snake venom. Later, we see a shaman try to recharge Jack's grace using a spell that involves grace from an archangel. Whatever the actual difference is, shamanism seems to be focused on healing and transformation more than other forms of spellcasting, so it's possible that the distinction from witchcraft comes down to application more than technique. The final weird wacky witch in the series came from the very last Monster of the Week episode. It's also another case of a so-called witch acting more like a monster than a spellcaster. Instead, the legendary Baba Yaga seems way more ghostly than witchy, as she more or less haunted a hotel where she stalked her victims invisibly until she's ready to eat them. Oh yeah, she ate people, specifically children, which is a super uncommon behavior amongst witches in the show. We didn't see her cast spells in the same way as other witches, but she did show off a few sick tricks. Like I said already, she could turn invisible at will, as well as glamour herself to appear as other people. She also seemed to have some degree of mind control, though she rarely used it, so it's hard to tell how potent it was. Apparently, all of her powers came from a magic ring that also acted as something of a horcrux for Baba, as she was immortal as long as the ring was intact. This makes me wonder if she, like the Twig and Twine Witch, was a borrower, though it's also possible that she just made the ring herself. After Dean smashed her precious, she goes up in green flames, so perhaps she was some variant of an Ozian witch. Who really knows for sure? And that, dear viewers, is more or less every type of witch in the show. There are other spellcasters and magic users throughout the series, but they're either not human or I just personally don't find them witchy enough to mention. If there are any that I missed, then let me know in the comments. Guys, it's been a crazy year. I started this channel in January and it's taken off way beyond what I imagined, so thank you so much to anyone and everyone that supported the channel. This is going to be the last video of 2023, but I'll have more for you in January. Until then, carry on,